This video is a response to the bothersome combination of inspiring philosophy and Johannan Raatz, whom I shall call Kermit for short.
Somebody talked! No one is safe! I'm getting out of here! Yeah!
So let's begin.
What is the mind? What is the universe? Are they one and the same? Is one an illusion created by the other? Are these questions meaningless to begin with? Why even ask them?
No, these questions aren't meaningless. The universe is the totality of all known or supposed phenomena and objects throughout the cosmos and space-time. It's everything that exists. The mind is simply a label that we give to an emergent property of the brain. You see, when you have a brain that consists of roughly 90 billion neurons, with roughly 1 quadrillion synaptic connections, the amount of complexity for which such a combination allows may give rise to the illusion of a soul, making it seem like there is something intrinsic about consciousness, when really it's just reducible to neural interactions going on inside your head. But let's see what IP and Kermit have to say.
In recent videos, we have discussed the strange results of quantum mechanics and its implications. Mind is fundamental. Realism has been falsified, and matter doesn't exist independent of measurement. The scientific evidence has piled up and led us to this conclusion.
However, what IP fails to mention is that this is just one interpretation of quantum mechanics, but even then this is a gross misrepresentation. As has been pointed out to IP, most recently by Andrew Smith, whose refutation of his free will argument I will link to in the description box, the observer effect has nothing to do with the physical presence of an observer. At least not in the way IP is talking about it. The observer effect has to do with Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which is fundamental to quantum mechanics. To detect a particle, the detector must interact with it, and this interaction inevitably changes the state of the motion of the particle, introducing uncertainty about its original state. In the slit seen here, if we were to pass a photon through the slit in order to see an electron's position, the electron would absorb the photon, and while better precision and understanding might be gained as to where the electron is, there would be greater uncertainty in regards to the momentum due to the photoelectric absorption of the electron. Phenomenon is not tantamount to the consciousness of an observer having any effect on the physical state of reality by its simply being present. As Sean Carroll notes.
Yeah, the kinds of events that lead the universe to split are simply observations of quantum systems. And that's a little bad way to put it, because observation makes it sound like the existence of a conscious observer is somehow important to quantum mechanics, and it's completely not. That's an utterly bogus road to go down. What an observation simply is bringing one system into contact with another, so that what this system is doing becomes entangled, becomes related to what this system is doing. So if this system is spin up or spin down, and this system is a little arrow, then you bring them in contact and the arrow becomes correlated with what the spin is doing.
The situation of the electron in the slit is one in which, in order to gain the ability to make a robust measurement concerning the properties of the electron, you must give up the ability to know other properties with the same level of certainty. This is due to the mathematical inequality that describes Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which describes the problems of measuring quantum mechanical systems. Without getting too technical, the equation that describes this uncertainty says that the product of the standard deviations of both the position and the momentum of a particle is greater than or equal to the quotient of Planck's constant and 4 pi. Quantum mechanical systems are very sensitive, but this does not mean that that same sensitivity scales up on a macrocosmic level, or even plays a role in the consciousness or the operations of the mind. Of course, IP could have known this if he had actually taken the time to open up a textbook and read or do some elementary research, rather than use Dr. Quantum videos taken from that awful movie, What the Bleep Do We Know, down the rabbit hole. But let's continue.
So without further delay, let us begin. Premise 1. The mind exists. Premise 2. The properties of the mind are not that which matter can have.
The properties of the mind are purely physical as far as we know. There is no evidence of an immaterial consciousness, soul, or spiritual essence that is separate from the physical interactions between neurons, axons, dendrites, and microtubules in the brain. Everything we know about neuroscience tells us that consciousness arises from these bioelectrical processes. Consciousness operates as the software, while the neural excitations and interactions between brain structures operate as the hardware. This should be obvious to anyone who can use a computer, literally. This is because the software, the images, the internet, and the media stored on the computer are separate from the hardware but not independently functioning apart from the hardware. IP's point here is moot. What he's referring to here are phenomena viewed from a third-person perspective and how they relate to perceptual integrations of such phenomena viewed from a first-person perspective. This perspectival switching is crucial to this introspective argument and will play a role later as I dismantle it. Ironically, Kermit agrees with this too. Look at him on the atheist experience.
Okay, so are you saying that the universe is a brain?
I'm saying it's a mind, an integrated information system. It's a mind, an integrated information system. It's a mind, an integrated information system. It's a mind, an integrated information system.
What we experience is a correlation between an electrical signal and the mental feeling of pain, but one can see the coherence of a possible world where one experiences pain without the need for an electrical signal. The point is that things like qualia are not physical substances. What we experience is mental substances like qualia, and then we assume they come from physical substances in and of themselves. But a mental substance, like the taste of sugar, does not exist with the physical substance. They are nothing more than the mental experience and all we really know. And then we just assume they correlate to physical properties. Therefore, upon examination, mental properties and physical properties are conceptually detached.
Did you catch it? I'm not surprised if you didn't. What IP has done is that he has divorced physical properties from mental properties when it is simply a matter of perspectival switching. He is using the possible world scenario to say that we can have a feeling of pain without a corresponding electrochemical signal of substance P rushing through the cutaneous fibers to the central nervous system of our brain. You can actually reverse the scenario to have a possible world in which there is an electrical signal to the brain without any correlation of pain. However, what IP doesn't realize is that this perspectival switching that I mentioned earlier is what allows him to make this sort of equivocation. This, however, does not mean that the mental properties and the physical properties are fundamentally detached. Instead, it just means that they are viewed from different complementary perspectives. IP fails to realize this even though his partner Kermit has just contradicted him in saying that the mind is an integrated information system. In other words, pain is simply a label that we put on how the mind processes information in the form of an electrochemical neuropeptidic signal of substance P through the nervous system. The mental property is simply the label that we put on the way the senses process the phenomenological information of reality. In the same way, color is just the way the brain processes different wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation. This fact does not simply mean that color can be divorced from any sort of objectively existing physical reality. They are just different things viewed from different perspectives. IP and Kermit don't seem to understand this.
Premise 3. Substance dualism is false.
I won't bother with this now. Substance dualism has been shown many times to be erroneous and incoherent in so many different ways, but for those who are curious, I'll link QualiaSoup's and SisyphusRedeemed's epic takedowns of substance dualism in the description box.
Conclude, all is mind. The universe is a mental construct. And without surprise to idealists, this is what the experimental results of quantum mechanics tells us. Matter is not fundamental in and of itself, but cannot exist prior to measurement, which was pointed out in our last 2 videos.
This is no longer funny. Well, the choral music was nice, and the clip from Inception was pretty cool. But this conclusion is just absurd. Since when have scientists leapt to the conclusion that all is mind? As I will further point out in this video when IP starts to employ modal logic, perception and mind are not the same thing. I'll use Kermit's definition of a mind as the final nail in the coffin of the introspective argument.
What about property dualism? Could one just use premise 1 and premise 2 to arrive at property dualism? that the mental world is just a property of physical substances and therefore doesn't reduce to its own substance, but is just a separate property emergent from matter. However, this is not parsimonious or verifiable, since we only interact through qualia on a mental level. If there is mental and physical properties of one substance, it is not parsimonious to posit separate properties that we do not interact with just to save an independent physical reality.
Well, if IP really believes that, I would advise him to maybe see if he could acquire brain damage or jump off a cliff to see if the brain has anything to do with the mind or to see if reality independently exists. His last question asked, how do we observe physical properties if they are not mental? Well, for one thing, this question is semantically flawed. We do not observe mental properties. Mental properties are simply the labels that we put on how our mind processes the phenomenological information of reality. The physical properties are what we observe about the phenomenon itself. For example, the properties of a mechanical wave such as wavelength, amplitude, frequency, and speed are not phenomenological observations, but simply descriptions of the source of particular phenomena, namely sound in this case. Because deaf people exist and we know the audiological mechanics of how sound is perceived through cilia in the ear, we know that sound is a property only of perception. In the same way, sharks and other marine animals have a sensorial ability distinct from humans known as electroreception, the ability to perceive and or detect the bioelectrical signals given off by other organisms in the environment. This ability especially comes in handy when trying to locate large schools of fish.
The shark may be the perfect killer, but what's the use of being armed to the teeth if you can't locate your prey? That's why the shark has such an array of super senses. Imagine if we had the senses of a shark. We'd have incredible hearing. How would you like to be able to hear your food cooking 1,500 meters away? Your super sense of smell would let you track your food from nearly a kilometer. Your eyes would be 10 times more sensitive to light, and you'd have an unbelievably keen sense of touch. From a distance of 3 meters, you'd be able to detect enough vibrations to build up a 3-dimensional picture of your lunch. Sharks have taken senses we know so well to the extreme, but that's not enough to make them #1 in the countdown. After all, lots of animals have extraordinary senses of smell and sight. Sharks are special because they have a 6th sense. They can detect the tiny electrical fields generated by all living creatures every time they move a muscle. Sharks are so sensitive, they can detect 0.5 billionth of a volt. That's like detecting the electricity created by a flashlight battery from a distance of 1,500 kilometers. The 6th sense of the shark is thanks to a network of tiny voltmeters tucked into pits around its mouth. These cells give the shark the ability to locate prey in complete darkness, or even when it's buried under sand. The shark possesses so many extraordinary senses that it's almost impossible for us to imagine how it perceives the world.
As was plainly evident in the previous clip, the physical reality impresses itself upon our and other animal sensory faculties, and from there the laws of physics and biochemistry allow our sensory faculties to work to output a cognitively filtered and interpreted picture of reality around us, what the 19th century pragmatist philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce coined as the phaneron. However, if IP wants to get rid of a mind-independent reality, I will indeed show him that this still does not save his argument. Indeed, the modal logic argument that he's about to present has one very fatal flaw that often goes unnoticed.
However, more importantly is that the mind cannot reduce to just a property. This can be shown in a simple deduction. Premise 1. If solipsism is conceivable, then a possible world could exist such that only the mind exists.
It is this first premise that I'm going to take issue with the most, and one must pay very careful attention because what I'm about to say may confuse you. So, here goes. If metaphysical solipsism, hard solipsism, is true, then the mind does not exist. Metaphysical solipsism means the absence of any mind, and let me explain to you why that is. The reason is because, in this case, a solipsistic world only contains perception. If a mind were to exist in a solipsistic world, that mind would necessarily have to be a part of the perception, because the only reason a mind exists is to, as Kermit said, integrate and or process the information of reality received by the senses. If metaphysical solipsism were true, then there would be no mind to process the information of reality because the metaphysical primacy of existence would be the perception. Thus, the perception would be metaphysically uncontingent. There would be no information to be integrated and or processed because everything that would exist in a solipsistic world would be composed of such phenomenological information. Everything that would exist in that world would simply be a part of a ceaselessly swarming sea of perceptual information. Think about it this way. Let's set up two scenarios. Scenario A. A computer is out in the woods, receiving information in the form of phenomena from the reality it inhabits. These instantiations of the properties of these phenomena are then computationally interpreted and processed by the computer. Then there's scenario B. Everything that exists is pure phenomena generated by the computer, even the computer's environment. Ask yourself, is there any need for the computer in scenario B to process and or integrate the phenomena that it perceives? The answer is no, because the computer autonomously generates the phenomena, and if it were like the computer in scenario A, it would have to both generate and process the phenomena at the same time, which is simply incoherent. In scenario B, reality is literally beamed from the computer. The phenomenological information of reality isn't processed, it's created, from nothing. What IP and Kermit argue for is the immateriality of perception, the ability to divorce perception from a mind, not the ability to divorce a mind from any sort of physical source or cause. IP's argument breaks down from the very first premise.
The conclusion still follows. In fact, we cannot even conceive of a mind-independent reality without a mind.
False. We cannot conceive of a perception-independent reality without a perception. This is because perception is necessary for conception, as the mental picture of reality is created by the brain, and the brain is needed to conceive of something, of anything. However, the perception is not necessary for the existence of reality, except in the case of a solipsistic world in which, as I just pointed out, the mind is non-existent.
Having an experience of undivided consciousness does not tell you what consciousness really is or what its relationship to the brain really is. There's nothing about introspection that leads you to sense that your subjectivity is at all dependent or even related to voltage changes and chemical interactions going on inside your head.
Of course, IP and Kermit, being the dishonest pricks they are, and fanciers of woo that they are, take Sam Harris completely out of context. What Harris was saying in that debate was that one cannot simply infer the causes of consciousness simply from introspection, but rather that a third-person perspective is necessary to truly understand it.
But what about those who still reject these philosophical implications? Well, as Ian Squires said, it is probably fair to say that most members of the physics community would reject these ideas. However, the reasons would be based more on prejudice than on sound argument, and the proportion of those who reject it would be much smaller if we considered only those who had actually thought carefully about the problems of quantum theory.
So he ends by shaming those who do not agree with his bullshit by saying, essentially, that we are just as gullible as the faithful that we so often demean. Well, here's another moment of inspiring philosophy not living up to his name. He didn't inspire philosophy in this video, but he corrupted it with his stupid bullshit. Thanks for watching.
Did you hear anything in there that convinces you?
No.